You mentioned the surveillance technology being sort of one of the more significant outputs from Elon Musk. Help us understand how that's being deployed. Maybe the example of how it's being used in Ukraine is instructive.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of the time, SpaceX, as we said, pretty much its only customer is the US military or the US government. And it is constantly winning these contracts to blast $500 million Lockheed Martin satellites and GPS systems into the stratosphere. And, of course, they tout the civilian benefits like, oh, your GPS on your iPhone will be 1% better now that this rocket is out there. But what it's really there to do is to really surveil the planet. And even the world of war has now been completely digitized to the point where in Ukraine, Musk is really a cornerstone of that fight, which, as we're speaking, seems to be winding down. However, from day one, Musk was very vocal about his support for the Ukrainian government and for Zelensky. And he made this big show of sending all of these Starlink satellites over to Ukraine so the country could get back online. If people don't know, Starlink is like this miniature satellite dish which you can stick on your car or your building, and you can directly communicate with one of Musk's satellites and bypass all the internet restrictions, et cetera, et cetera. So it's, in some ways, it's a very useful product. But what we found was a lot of the quote unquote donations that Musk were giving were not exactly donated. In fact, they had been purchased by the US government and sent to Ukraine, and specifically to the Ukrainian military. And all of this high-tech equipment that NATO countries have been sending Ukraine over the past 3 years, often they rely on the internet and to have an internet connection to even function. So a lot of this technology that has been sent to the Ukrainian armed forces, they need an internet connection, i.e. Starlink, to use thermal imaging cameras or to use the targeting software so they can actually fire at Russian positions. And in fact, a lot of the triggers and the firing systems more generally also require an internet connection to actually operate. And so many Ukrainian generals have given interviews to Western outlets saying that they are actually completely reliant on Starlink in order to fight Russia. So again, we see once again how Elon Musk is providing an absolutely crucial role in the national security state and the military-industrial complex. You might remember a lot of the interviews that we saw from people underground in Azovstal, which, now we know they were actually part of the Azov battalion and always said, coming via, satellite communications or whatever. These people were underground, and yet they were able to give like high definition interviews with CNN and MSNBC, etc. And they were doing that because they had access to Starlink. So yeah, that company is absolutely crucial to the government and the military of Ukraine's communications, operations, and indeed its military. So Musk has been playing an absolutely crucial role over the past few years in that conflict as well.
It's a little confusing to understand the relationships between Donald Trump, Elon Musk, the fact that there is a significant part of the Republican base now that is very opposed to the intelligence agencies, also opposed to U.S. involvement in foreign conflicts, including Ukraine, the portrayal of Donald Trump as having allegiances to Putin, which of course is playing out in the context of the war winding down on his watch. Or perhaps more accurately, they're being pressured to wind the war down on his watch in a way that didn't exist under Joe Biden. And Elon Musk's contributions to the Ukrainian fight through technological means. How is all of this being understood by the public, particularly conservatives, when there do seem to be some competing factions going on here in terms of who Elon Musk is, who he represents, and who Donald Trump has up until this point managed to portray himself as an outsider, as someone who is willing to be antagonistic to the intelligence industry. And here comes Elon Musk, who literally named his son after his CIA handler.
I mean, one of the sort of kindest criticisms you can make of the modern conservative movement is that they are sometimes not ideologically consistent, right? So Donald Trump in his first term, right, He presents himself as an outsider, an anti-war figure, someone who will end the endless wars. But, just off the top of my head, he dropped the mother of all bombs on Afghanistan, the largest non-nuclear weapon ever used in anger. He threatened to drop nuclear weapons on North Korea. He tried to organize an armed intervention in Venezuela. He pumped up the support for Saudi Arabia during its genocide on Yemen. He approved the moving of the US Embassy to Jerusalem. He increased the Pentagon budget massively to its highest point ever. So these are not the actions of an anti-war president. And yet again, Trump might talk a big game on a lot of these things, but ultimately his track record doesn't really show that he's some sort of true anti-war figure. He's not like a Cindy Sheehan. He's not, somebody who, goes out constantly and is, getting arrested like people at Code Pink or whatever. And that's why there's been a lot of skepticism on the left when it comes to that. But there is a genuine movement in the United States and a genuine populist feeling among both people who are more on the left and on the right that the United States has been involved in far too many wars. We are spending far too much money on defense and the military, and that sort of money has to be used back at home to repair crumbling infrastructure, help the education system, which is in crisis, deal with the homelessness epidemic, the epidemic among fentanyl use. I mean, there's so many better uses for this money than throwing $1 trillion every year at Boeing and Raytheon and Lockheed Martin to provide us death machines, half of which, if were ever used, might spell the end of the world. So people can see this madness and they want their leaders, whether that's political leaders like Trump or economic leaders like Musk, to reflect that. And so I think a lot of their talk, they will talk on one side of their face about being against war. So, Musk will say something along the lines of what Trump says about ending endless wars. And then the other side, he's a massive Pentagon contractor making billions out of this. So yeah, as I said, these people are not consistent. They will say one thing on a Monday and another on a Tuesday. And so that's why I think it's very important not to trust what Donald Trump says, not to take what he says at face value and actually look at his actions, because actions speak far louder than words. And it's the same with Elon Musk as well. I mean, he sits there for hours every day tweeting non-stop, it seems, about all sorts of subjects. And then you go back a couple of months, he's saying exactly the opposite thing. So these people are extremely mercurial, and it depends who's got their ear. They're willing to change their opinion if it suits them, and particularly if business interests are involved.
Yeah, I think what's frustrating is that obviously the Democratic Party is getting a lot of pushback for not having any resistance in this moment, basically, even from folks who have historically stood beside and defended the Democratic Party at every turn. The Julia Ioffes and stuff of the world are even like, what's going on with the Democrats? Where's all the fight? And you see this discourse going around about how it's a messaging battle and you got to point out this, that, and the other. And, Crockett has her little takedowns and all of this stuff is going on. But it does seem to me, I'm worried that the Democrats are getting caught up, or not worried, but because they're none of my business, but I can see them getting caught up in the same patterns they got caught up in 2016, which is to make points about hypocrisy, to make points about racism, which I think is real and true. The points aren't necessarily bad, but to not really be criticizing Republicans on the basis that their base would actually care about, on the issues that their base would actually care about. And to me, the argument is obvious. What does it mean for Donald Trump to be sitting in these press conferences with Elon Musk at his side as though Trump is a faithful, disgruntled wife at a press conference where the politician husband is apologizing for his misdeeds? He looks like an extra, a kind of a surly extra at his own press events as the president of the United States. What does it mean for Elon Musk to have that much influence and that much control? Who is Elon Musk, and how should we be understanding the money that he puts into these campaigns, people like him put into these campaigns, as having influence over policy? Like, this is the same argument that the left makes, I think, very effectively, to the extent that we can be heard, about why various liberal politicians can't be trusted no matter how nice they seem or how many ice cream cones they eat, or how many memes they do with Barack Obama and sunglasses. But I am worried that Democrats won't make that argument because at the end of the day, they're incapable, because they agree, of making the following criticism. Elon Musk can't be trusted. He named his son after a CIA handler. He is the ultimate consummate insider. He is a part of the problem. He directly profits from there being endless war, and therefore Donald Trump is going to continue to pursue traditional U.S. foreign policy, U.S. imperialism, because that's what's filling Elon Musk's pocketbooks. To me, that is such a compelling argument that I fear Democrats cannot make, because they too put a former Raytheon CEO as the Secretary of Defense.
Listen, 100%. It doesn't matter, to a certain extent, it doesn't really matter who's in the White House, whether it's a guy with a blue tie on or a red tie on. Ultimately, both parties are the party of war. They're the party of Wall Street. They're the party of big business, because that's where their money comes from, and it has for decades. You look at, both parties are filled to the brim with lobbyists who used to work at these big military companies like Raytheon, like Boeing, like General Dynamics, etc. And even people on the furthest left of the Democratic Party, like Bernie Sanders, refuse to really go after these influences within the party. And that is deeply frustrating to see, because as we talked about before, Elon Musk is a huge Pentagon contractor. He's, by some measures, the richest man in the world. This is the real return to the era of robber barons, where, big industrialists like, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the JP Morgans actually just, came in and directly controlled the country themselves. And I hope we're going to talk later about, how Elon Musk is actually involved in the nuclear business as well. We are looking at a situation where, as I said, both parties are the party of war. The United States is addicted to war. There's only been about 20 years since independence, since 1776, when the United States hasn't been formally at war. And the Democrats are absolutely powerless to criticize this, precisely because they believe in all of this. So when, Donald Trump threatens war against someone, the Democrats will say, oh, we can do it better. Or when, Trump is thinking about winding down the war in Ukraine and ramping it up in China, the Democrats will say, oh, we shouldn't, abandon our ally in Ukraine. Or when it comes to immigration, when, Trump, the Trump administration is putting out these absolutely ghastly videos of, people in chains being flown back, just a state of utter depravity. The Democrats will say, can you believe this? We actually, deported more. They're not actually putting out a sort of moral argument. They're saying we would be the party, we would be doing this better. And so they're ceding any sort of genuine sort of popular feeling to the Republican Party, who can in some ways present themselves as outsiders, which is completely laughable, of course. But when the Democrats are, saying actually Trump is an outsider, he is a threat, he is a danger, and Trump's saying that too, I'm not really that surprised that some people fall for this, because ultimately people in the United States are so desperate for some genuine populist, pro-working class policies that they will believe it when anybody comes along, because, we just don't have that. And so we're in a really bad situation where Musk and his ilk have extraordinary power over policy to basically write whatever policy they want. With Doge, Musk is going after all of these government departments which could potentially be a threat to him. Of course, he and his acolytes say they have managed to cut tens of billions of dollars of fat from the US budget. I'm pretty skeptical of that, precisely because the biggest fat in the US budget is actually from the Pentagon and the military, and Musk hasn't gone after that at all, precisely because actually quite a lot of his wealth comes specifically from US subsidies given to him by Washington, particularly from the defense industry. And so until he actually goes after that, I think we can just see this for what it is, which is pretty much an attack on the working class, an attack on any parts of the government, which actually might go and potentially stymie the power of big corporations and big oligarchs like Musk, and potentially help people, like Medicare, like Social Security, like education. All of those things are being gutted. But the Pentagon, they seem to be pretty happy with what's going on right now.
Yeah, I like the jokes that go something like Elon Musk or Donald Trump's budget cuts are like saying, "I lost 40 pounds by cutting off my leg." Congratulations, I guess. Um, you know, to that end, it's not just like the kind of hypocrisy of Elon Musk and Donald Trump. It's also people who were once left anti-war firebrands like Tulsi Gabbard. You recently wrote about her in a piece called "From Anti-War Progressive to Pro-Drone Militarist: Tulsi Gabbard's Odd Political Trajectory." What do you think happened there with her? I mean, this is a woman who historically kind of turned her back on the Democratic Party to support Bernie Sanders in a moment that for many of us at the time felt very heroic and inspiring, and like some indication that she really meant what she said, that she was willing to put some skin in the game and take on some risks to follow her genuine ideals. Now she's a part of this CIA administration.
It really is extraordinary. You know, Tulsi was a real rising star of the Democratic Party in the mid 2010s. She, by that time, had already secured a pretty senior position in the Democratic Party. And it looked like if she just sort of toed the Pelosi line, that she could be in a position of real influence. And yet, by 2016, she had come out of the woodwork and was openly supporting Sanders over Clinton, which was a very a controversial thing to do for establishment politicians. And since then, that's really marked her card to a certain extent. I think, you know, we could call her a bit of an opportunist. She started off, of course, a very long time ago. Her first political statements were part of this extremely homophobic movement in Hawaii that her dad was a major member of. And, you know, she moved way over to the progressive side in the mid 2010s and allied herself with Bernie. But as soon as that didn't work, she immediately started, you know, making overtures to the right wing and to the Republican Party. And it was interesting that even throughout the time that she was being a progressive, some people on the far right really heard her call and thought that she was quite an interesting character. People like Steve Bannon thought Tulsi was a real go-getter. Even apparently Donald Trump in his first term considered appointing Tulsi to some sort of position. Clearly, that was too early for that, but in Donald Trump's second term, that has exactly happened. And Gabbard, I guess, over the past few years, have slowly been pushing herself towards the Republican Party. I remember during the protest over George Floyd, she very much presented herself as the sort of Blue Lives Matter Republican, and that seemed to be something that really pushed her much more towards the Republican Party. And she's been doing that for a long time, but she has always been a highly opportunistic individual. We have to remember that even though she seemed like she was anti-war, she was still an active duty officer in the US military. So we have to be clear about how anti-war was she. Another pretty serious red flag about Tulsi was how close she was to the state of Israel. I mean, there are pictures of her and videos of her on stage with people like Rabbi Shmuley, and she was absolutely beloved by the conservative and the Christian Friends of Israel groups in the United States. So she always had those sorts of connections. Furthermore, when it came to, you know, foreign wars like the war in Syria, she was very much against it, but she was always very much a hawk on terrorism. She always saw herself, she never actually questioned the power of the US military or the inherent goodness of it. So she was never saying, you know, we are fundamentally at fault here. The United States is a global empire. We have to shut this down. She was just saying we're fighting the wrong wars. We have to be going after Muslim extremists. And again, that was another red flag. And of course, we have to remember that she is actually a psychological operations officer in the US military. So once again, that is another red flag. I don't think there are many progressives, many socialists, many genuinely anti-war figures who are that senior in the US military. And even more importantly, in the psychological operations division of said military. And I think those sorts of things added up together, maybe we can see her career trajectory in the plain light of day with 2020 vision and understand that maybe a lot of us got played in the 2010s, those of us who bought into Gabbard's shtick about being anti-war.
Which do you think came first? I mean, it sounds like you're saying that the writing was always on the wall and this was always going to be her trajectory. But to me, that also makes the Bernie support a little confusing because there's another narrative that says maybe the Bernie support was genuine, but when she faced the backlash and realized there was no future for her in the Democratic Party, she just sold out. Maybe it's a little bit of A, a little bit of column B, but how do you make sense of the choice to use Bernie as a fulcrum for a rightward pivot?
Yeah, listen, I mean, the political spectrum in the United States is pretty interesting. It doesn't really exist entirely on a simply left-right axis. If that was the case, right, that Bernie could never go to places like West Virginia and talk to coal miners and talk to them about class politics and get them to be completely on board with what he's saying and get, a really substantial percentage of the vote there. People are not ideologically consistent, whether that's Republicans or whether that's ordinary individuals. So sometimes we react to different things about people's politics. With Gabbard, I mean, honestly, if she was perhaps, I wonder if she just sensed that the tides were shifting, and she thought maybe the Sanders campaign was a good thing to hitch her brand to, and it didn't work out. She was then in the political wilderness. She knew that the sort of progressive movement and the Democrats had been smashed, and saw a rising MAGA movement on the right and thought, I better ally myself to this if I want to keep rising in American politics. And if that is the case, she has been a very astute character, and it has paid off extraordinarily because she's now head of the DNI. So, in some ways, I have to say, hats off to her. She seems to have gotten what she wanted.
I mean, I'm also remembering the moment during the 2020 debate, right, where she decapitated, metaphorically, Kamala Harris and came after Harris from the left over her criminal justice record.
Now, Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
I mean, it's all over those. And you say subsequently to that she framed herself as a Blue Lives Matter person. I mean, if that's the case, these are flip-flops, that are extremely extreme. And it's just remarkable that none of this stuff seems to follow conservatives. I mean, it's probably there's examples that people could point to among liberals as well. But the ability for these folks to reinvent themselves and then to stick the landing in the context of what does feel like a genuine anti-establishment sentiment is kind of terrifying, to be honest.
Well, listen, let's take an analogy from something that we both are familiar with, which is the world of alternative media. There's plenty of people who started off as progressives or liberals or leftists, and then in the 2010s or later just decided, actually, I'm going to do a full heel turn and become, an alt-right figure and make 6 figures a month easily. There are so many of these. I'm not going to start naming people, but I think a lot of people watching the show or listening do know many of these people that we're talking about, right? So this is quite a well-trodden path in politics and in media as well. And if you do that, the riches await you. You're not going to become a millionaire working in lefty anti-war alternative media. But if you're able to get the Dennis Prager bucks or the Miriam Edelson bucks, suddenly you can have an extremely good life, making almost nothing and putting the minimum amount of work in and, taking 5 days off a week. And, these people have almost unlimited amounts of money to throw out. And it's a little bit like that in politics as well. And if you are a former leftist or a former socialist or whatever, that isn't held against you in the same way as if someone went from the right to the left. If you are one of those, it's almost boosts your credibility because you can say, well, I used to be like this, and then I escaped the cult of wokeism or whatever. And you can actually make that your brand, whether you're a politician or whether you're a media influencer, and you can have a very successful life out of it. And we're seeing that constantly all the time happening in the United States and indeed in Western Europe too.
I mean, the part that I'm really stuck on is how does the abolish the FBI crowd sit comfortably with this I'm naming my child after my CIA handler crowd? Like that's what's really frustrating. How does the defund USAID, which, you know, I'm cool with, but how does the defund USAID crowd go along with the I'm Elon Musk and I'm making all my money off of contracts through USAID? Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.